The stars had always seemed so peaceful from Earth. For thousands of years, humans looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. They built telescopes and sent radio signals into the darkness, hoping for an answer. In the year 2147, they finally got one. But it was not the answer they wanted. Admiral Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of the defense station orbiting Earth. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had served in the military for 30 years, but nothing in his career had prepared him for what he was seeing now. On the screens in front of him, hundreds of alien ships were entering the solar system. They moved in perfect formation, like a swarm of metal insects crossing the void of space. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission," said Lieutenant Taylor. She was young, barely 30, but she was one of the best officers Carter had ever worked with. Her hands moved across the console as she tried to make sense of the alien signal. The message played across every screen on the station. The creature that appeared was reptilian, with scales the color of dried blood and eyes like yellow fire. It spoke in a voice that seemed to echo inside their heads. "We are the Dominion. We have conquered 37 worlds across this galaxy. Your planet has been selected for harvest. You will surrender your leaders, your resources, and your population. Resistance is not advised. You have 72 hours to comply." The transmission ended. For a long moment, no one on the bridge spoke. Carter felt his heart pounding in his chest. He had always believed that if aliens existed, they would come in peace. He had been wrong. Within hours, the leaders of Earth gathered for an emergency meeting. Presidents, prime ministers, generals, and scientists from every nation watched the alien message together. The debate was fierce. Some wanted to surrender immediately. Others wanted to fight. But how could they fight against ships that had crossed the stars? Human technology was like a toy compared to what they possessed. In the end, Earth's leaders chose to resist. They sent a message back to the alien fleet. Humanity would not surrender. They would defend their home. The response came 12 hours later. Carter watched from orbit as a beam of light descended from the largest alien ship. It struck the city of Ayers, and in an instant, 14 million people were gone. The city did not burn. It did not crumble. It simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater of glass and ash. Taylor fell to her knees. She had family in that city, a sister, 2 nephews. Now they were gone, erased like words on a chalkboard. Around her, other officers were crying, screaming, or staring in silence at the screens. Carter gripped the railing in front of him so hard that his knuckles turned white. "Send everything we have," he ordered. His voice was calm, but inside he was breaking. Every missile, every ship, everything. The United Earth Defense Fleet responded. Hundreds of missiles streaked toward the alien armada. Nuclear warheads, the most powerful weapons humanity had ever created, exploded against the shields. The explosions lit up the darkness of space like a second sun. When the light faded, the alien ships were untouched. Their shields had absorbed everything without a scratch. The commander sent another message. This time there was amusement in his voice. "Your weapons are primitive. Your resistance is meaningless. Surrender now or more of your cities will burn. You have 60 hours remaining." Carter ordered his ships to engage directly. It was a desperate move, and he knew it. The defense fleet was made up of cruisers and fighters designed for patrol duty, not real combat, but they were all humanity had. The battle lasted less than an hour. Human ships exploded one after another as weapons tore through their hulls. Pilots sent final messages to their families before their vessels were destroyed. The carrier Relentless took a direct hit to its engine section and began to drift, burning and broken. Taylor was aboard the Relentless. As fire spread through the corridors around her, she crawled to a communication console. Blood ran down her face from a wound on her forehead, but she ignored it. She had one job left to do. She activated the ship's recording systems and transmitted everything, every image, every sensor reading, every moment of the battle to Earth's surface. If humanity was going to die, at least they would know what had happened. At least they would remember. On Earth, billions of people watched the footage. They saw their ships destroyed. They saw the alien fleet, untouched and unstoppable, hanging in orbit like a promise of death. They saw the crater where heirs had been. And something changed. In factories and laboratories, scientists and engineers who had been competitors began working together. In military bases around the world, soldiers from nations that had been enemies for generations shared intelligence and strategies. In ordinary homes, parents held their children and made a silent promise. This would not be the end. General Price stood in an underground bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. He was an old soldier with scars on his face and fire in his eyes. Around him sat the surviving leaders of Earth's military. The mood was dark, but Price refused to give in to despair. "They think we are weak," he said. "They think we will break, but they do not know us. They do not know what we are capable of when we are pushed to the edge. We have 60 hours. That is enough time to show them who they are dealing with." In orbit, the fleet waited. Their commander, High Commander, was confident. He had conquered 12 worlds himself. He had seen species beg for mercy, seen civilizations crumble at the sight of his armada. Humans were no different. They were soft, divided, primitive. In 60 hours they would surrender, and if they did not, he would burn another city and another until nothing remained but ash and obedience. He did not know that in those 60 hours, humanity would change forever. He did not know that the attack on heirs had not broken the human spirit. It had awakened something that had been sleeping for a very long time. They had made a terrible mistake. They had come to harvest a world of sheep. Instead, they had walked into a den of wolves. And the wolves were waking up. The underground bunker was cold and crowded. Hundreds of the minds on Earth had gathered in the facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. They had come from every country, speaking dozens of languages, carrying research that had once been top secret. Now, there were no more secrets. There was only survival. Dr. Nelson stood at the center of the main chamber, her red hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She had not slept in 2 days. Dark circles hung under her eyes, but her voice was strong as she addressed the room. "I have found something," she said. "During the attack on heirs, our satellites recorded the energy signature of the alien beam weapon. I have been studying that signature for the past 36 hours, and I believe I have found a weakness." The room went silent. General Price stepped forward, his arms crossed over his chest. "Explain." Turned to a large screen behind her. Numbers and graphs filled the display, but she kept her explanation simple. The shields work by creating a harmonic barrier around their ships. This barrier absorbs kinetic energy and disperses it. That is why our missiles did nothing. The shields simply absorbed the impact. She pressed a button and the display changed. But the harmonics are predictable. They follow a pattern that repeats every few seconds. If we can create a weapon that matches the opposite frequency, we can use their own shields against them. Instead of absorbing our attacks, the shields will amplify them. Price stared at the screen for a long moment. "How long do you need to build this weapon?" "With the resources in this facility, maybe 48 hours. But I will need help from every physicist and engineer we have." Price nodded. "You will have it. Whatever you need, you get." While and her team worked on the new weapon, other operations were happening across the planet. Lieutenant Commander Chris Morgan led a special forces team into the frozen wilderness of Siberia. 3 days earlier, a scout ship had crashed there after being hit by a lucky shot from a ground defense battery. The ship was damaged but mostly intact. Inside its wreckage lay secrets that could change everything. Chris was a quiet man with steady hands and sharp eyes. He had grown up in a small town in Ohio, the son of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. Now he was leading a mission that would decide the fate of his species. His team reached the crash site at midnight. The alien ship was half buried in snow, its metal hull glowing faintly in the darkness. Soldiers had been guarding it, but they had been dealt with by a Russian strike team hours earlier. Now the wreckage belonged to humanity. "Specialist Turner, you are up," Chris said. Turner stepped forward. She was an engineer, small and wiry, with grease-stained fingers and a mind that never stopped working. She had been building and fixing machines since she was 12 years old. An alien spaceship was just another puzzle to solve. She spent 16 hours inside the wreckage, cutting through panels, studying circuits, and downloading data from the ship's computer. By the time she emerged, her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were bright with excitement. "I got it," she said. "Their propulsion system, their navigation data, their communication protocols. I got everything." Chris allowed himself a small smile. "Good work. Now let us get this back to base." Back in the bunker, the pieces were coming together. S team had built a prototype of the harmonic disruptor. S data revealed the locations of bases across the galaxy. Engineers worked around the clock to retrofit human ships with the new weapon systems. But the most remarkable change was not in the technology. It was in the people. For centuries, humanity had been divided. Nations had fought wars over land, religion, and resources. Old hatreds had been passed down from generation to generation. But now, all of that was forgotten. A Chinese engineer worked beside an American physicist. A Russian soldier shared a meal with a Japanese pilot. A German doctor treated the wounds of a Brazilian Marine. General Price walked through the bunker and saw something he had never seen before: the entire human race working as one. He stopped beside a young woman who was welding components onto a missile casing. Her name tag said. Her hands moved with practiced skill, but her eyes were red from crying. "Did you lose someone in Ayers?" Price asked. She nodded without looking up. "My brother, he was visiting a friend there when it happened." "I am sorry." Finally met his eyes. There was no fear in her gaze, only cold determination. "Do not be sorry, General. Just make sure we hit them back twice as hard." Price put a hand on her shoulder. "We will, I promise." With 12 hours remaining before the deadline, the preparations were complete. 53 human ships had been equipped with harmonic disruptors. They were not enough to match the alien fleet in numbers, but they no longer needed to. They had something better than numbers. They had weapons that worked. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the Defiant, the fleet's new flagship. The ship had been a cargo hauler 2 weeks ago. Now it was armed with the most advanced weapons humanity had ever created. Taylor stood beside him. She had survived the destruction of the Relentless and had refused medical leave. Her wounds were still healing, but she wanted to be here. She needed to be here. "Sir, the fleet is ready," she said. Carter looked at the armada hung in the darkness ahead, confident and unaware. They expected surrender. They expected more easy prey. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Carter opened a channel to the entire fleet. His voice was calm and steady. "This is Admiral Carter. For the past week we have been told that we cannot win. We have been told that our weapons are useless, that our ships are toys, that we are nothing more than primitives waiting to be conquered. Today we prove them wrong. Today we show the galaxy what humanity is made of. Today we fight back." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was iron. "All ships engage." The human fleet surged forward. The surprised by the sudden attack scrambled to respond. Their weapons fired and human ships began to burn. But this time, humanity fired back. The first harmonic disruptor beam struck a destroyer. For a split second, the alien shields glowed brighter than the sun. Then the ship exploded from the inside, torn apart by its own defenses. In the command center of the flagship, High Commander stared at his screens in disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered. But it was not impossible. It was humanity fighting with everything they had. And the battle had only just begun. The battle above Earth was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. For 3,000 years, the Dominion had conquered world after world. No species had ever truly fought back. No species had ever made them bleed. Until now. Admiral Carter gripped the armrest of his command chair as the Defiant shook from an enemy hit. Alarms screamed through the bridge. Smoke filled the air. But he did not retreat. He could not retreat. Behind him was Earth, and on Earth were 8 billion people counting on him. Target their lead cruiser, he ordered. Fire all disruptors. The Defiant's weapons lit up the darkness. Beams of energy, tuned to the exact opposite frequency of the shields, slammed into the enemy cruiser. For a heartbeat, the alien ship's shields glowed bright blue. Then the cruiser broke apart, its hull cracking like an egg, fire and debris spreading in all directions. Across the battle, human ships were fighting and dying. The carrier Valiant took 3 direct hits and broke in half. The destroyer Courage exploded after ramming an enemy battleship. Pilots in small fighters flew into the gaps in alien formations, firing everything they had before being shot down. But for every human ship that fell, they took 2 or 3 vessels with them. Lieutenant Taylor worked at her console, coordinating the fleet's movements. Her fingers flew across the controls, directing squadrons, calling out enemy positions, keeping the chaos organized. She had not slept in 3 days. She had not eaten in 12 hours. But she would not stop. Every time she felt tired, she thought of her sister and her nephews, gone in an instant when Ayers was destroyed. That memory kept her going. "Sir, enemy flagship is moving to the rear," she reported. "I think they are trying to retreat." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Not a chance. Signal Captain Tyler Grant. Tell him to cut them off." On the other side of the battle, Captain Grant received the order. He was a young officer, only 32, with a reputation for being reckless. Some called him crazy. Others called him the best pilot in the fleet. Right now, he was both. "All right, everyone," he said to his squadron. "The big fish is trying to run. Let us show them what happens when you mess with Earth." Grant's squadron of 12 fighters dove through the chaos of the battle. Enemy fire filled the space around them. 2 of his pilots were hit and destroyed instantly. A third lost control and spun into an asteroid. But Grant kept going, weaving through explosions and debris with impossible skill. They reached the flagship just as it was powering up its engines to escape. Grant lined up his shot and fired his disruptor. The beam struck the flagship's engine section, and the massive ship lurched to a stop. "Direct hit," Grant reported. "Their engines are dead. They are not going anywhere." On the Defiant, Carter allowed himself a grim smile. "All ships, concentrate fire on the flagship. End this." The human fleet converged. Dozens of ships surrounded the crippled command vessel. Disruptor beams tore through its weakened shields. Secondary explosions rippled across its hull. Inside the flagship, High Commander watched his empire crumble. His officers were screaming, running, dying. His sensors showed his fleet being torn apart. This was not supposed to happen. Humans were supposed to be weak. Humans were supposed to surrender. He opened a communication channel, his voice filled with rage and disbelief. "This is impossible. You are primitives. Your technology is centuries behind ours. How are you doing this?" Taylor responded. Her voice was cold, steady, and filled with quiet fury. "You killed 14 million of our people. You thought that would make us surrender. You were wrong. It made us angry. And you have no idea what humans can do when we are angry." Had no response. A moment later, the flagship's core exploded and he was gone. The battle continued for another 2 hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Without their command ship, the fleet fell into chaos. Some ships tried to flee and were hunted down. Others fought to the death and were destroyed. By the time the last alien vessel was eliminated, the space around Earth was filled with wreckage. Humanity had lost 41 ships. Over 12,000 sailors and pilots had given their lives, but they had won. On the surface of Earth, people watched the battle through telescope feeds and satellite images. When the last ship exploded, a sound rose from the planet. It was the sound of billions of people cheering, crying, and embracing each other. They had survived. Against all odds, they had survived. In the bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Price stood with his officers and watched the final moments of the battle. When it was over, he lowered his head and whispered a prayer for the fallen. Dr. Nelson sat in a corner, exhausted beyond words. Her weapon had worked. Her calculations had saved her species. But all she could think about was the cost. So many lives lost. So much destruction. Turner approached her and put a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, you did it. You saved us." Looked up, her eyes red with tears. "Did I? Or did I just give us the tools to kill better?" Sat down beside her. "Both probably, but that is not your fault. They came here looking for slaves. They got a war instead. Whatever happens next, at least we are still here to face it." In orbit, the Defiant drifted among the wreckage. Admiral Carter stood at the viewport, looking down at Earth. The planet was but unbroken. The crater of Ayres was visible from space, a permanent reminder of what had been lost. Joined him at the viewport. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "What happens now?" she finally asked. Carter was silent for a while. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of command. "Now we take the fight to them. They have an empire out there. Dozens of worlds, billions of slaves. If we wait here, they will come back with a bigger fleet. We cannot let that happen." Nodded slowly. "So we go on the offensive." "We do more than that," Carter said. "We tear their empire apart. We free every species they have enslaved. We make sure they can never threaten anyone again." He turned away from the viewport and faced his crew. His voice carried across the bridge, strong and certain. "Get me a channel to Earth Command. We have work to do." The Battle of Earth was over, but humanity's war was just beginning. And for the first time in galactic history, the hunters had become the hunted. They had awakened something they did not understand, something that would not stop until the job was done. They had awakened humanity. And humanity was coming for them. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Earth. In that time, everything had changed. The shipyards orbiting Luna never stopped working. Day and night, thousands of workers built the new fleet. These were not patrol ships or cargo haulers. These were warships, designed from the beginning to fight and win. Each one carried Nelson's harmonic disruptors, along with new weapons developed from technology. Each one was crewed by men and women who had volunteered knowing they might never come home. The United Human Alliance had formed in the weeks after the battle. Old borders meant nothing now. Old enemies had become brothers and sisters in arms. The entire species had one goal: to make sure what happened to Ayres never happened again. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the Endeavour, the new flagship of the human fleet. It was 3 times the size of the Defiant, with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Behind it, 200 ships followed in formation, their engines glowing like stars in the darkness. "Admiral, we are approaching the first target," Taylor reported. She was now a commander, promoted for her actions during the battle. She had earned every bit of that rank. Carter nodded. "Show me." They displayed a planet covered in gray clouds. According to the data Turner had recovered from the crashed scout ship, this was Prime, one of the oldest slave worlds in the Empire. Millions of beings from a species called that had been forced to work in mines and factories for generations. They had never known freedom. "What is the enemy strength?" Carter asked. 30 warships in orbit, plus ground forces numbering around 50,000, answered. "Standard garrison." Carter studied the display. They had not expected humans to reach this far into their territory so quickly. Their defenses were spread thin. "Signal Captain Shaw. His Marines will handle the ground operation. The rest of the fleet will secure orbit." The battle for Prime was short but fierce. Human ships tore through the orbital defenses in less than an hour. The alien commanders, still arrogant despite the defeat at Earth, refused to surrender. They died with their ships. The ground operation was more complicated. Captain Shaw led 5,000 Marines to the surface in drop ships. They landed outside the main slave complex, a massive facility surrounded by walls and guard towers. Shaw was a big man with a calm voice and kind eyes. He had been a teacher before the war, coaching football at a high school in Texas. Now he led soldiers into battle against alien slavers. Life had a strange sense of humor. "Remember the rules," he told his troops before they advanced. "We are not here to conquer, we are here to liberate. Protect the civilians at all costs. Only fire on soldiers." The fighting lasted 3 days. The guards fought hard, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. Human Marines pushed through the complex room by room, freeing thousands of slaves along the way. Shaw would never forget the moment they opened the main detention center. Inside were hundreds of, thin and weak from years of hard labor. They had gray skin, large dark eyes, and delicate hands that had been ruined by the mines. When they saw the human soldiers, they did not know what to do. They had never seen anyone stand against them before. A young female approached Shaw. She was barely more than a child, her body covered in scars. She spoke in broken, the only language the slaves were allowed to learn. "You fight masters?" she asked. Shaw knelt down so he was at her eye level. "Yes, we fight them, and we are going to set you free." The girl stared at him for a long moment. Then she began to cry, not from sadness but from something she had never felt before: hope. Word of the liberation spread quickly. Across the empire, enslaved species heard the impossible news. The humans had come. The humans were fighting. The humans were winning. Over the next 4 months, the human fleet freed 12 more worlds. On each planet, they gave the former slaves a choice: join the fight against or find safe passage to neutral space. Most chose to fight. They formed their own battalions and joined the human Marines. A species called who had been enslaved for their engineering skills, helped build new weapons and repair damaged ships. A race of natural pilots, volunteered to fly alongside human squadrons. The alliance grew with each victory. Species that had been enemies for centuries now fought side by side. They shared food, stories, and grief. They learned each other's languages and customs. What had started as humanity's war had become something bigger: a revolution. Back on Earth, Dr. Nelson worked to coordinate the scientific efforts of the growing alliance. Each species brought unique knowledge. They understood mineral extraction. They were masters of energy systems. They had developed navigation techniques that humans had never imagined. "We are learning as much from them as they are from us," told General Price during a briefing. "In 6 months, our technology has advanced more than it did in the previous century." Price nodded slowly. "What about the response? They must be preparing a counterattack." His expression grew serious. "Our intelligence suggests they are gathering their remaining fleet at They are calling back every ship, every soldier. They are preparing for a final stand." "How many ships?" "Best estimate, 600, maybe more." Price was silent for a long moment. The human alliance had 250 ships now, plus another 100 from their new allies. They were still badly outnumbered. But numbers had not mattered at Earth. Maybe they would not matter at Prime either. "We have come too far to stop now," Price finally said. "Begin planning the final assault." On the bridge of the Endeavour, Admiral Carter received the orders. He gathered his senior officers for a final briefing. Around the table sat Commander Taylor, Captain Shaw, Captain Grant, and a dozen others. They had all changed in the past 6 months. They had all lost friends, survived battles, and become harder than they ever thought possible. "This is it," Carter said. "They are gathering everything they have at there. If we win there, the war is over. If we lose—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Spoke up, what are our odds? Carter looked at her steadily. Honestly, not great. They outnumber us 3-1, and they will be fighting to protect their home. This will be the hardest battle we have ever faced. Captain Grant grinned despite the grim assessment. So, normal Tuesday then. A few people laughed. Even Carter allowed himself a small smile. Get your crews ready, he said. We jump to Prime in 48 hours. Whatever happens there, we finish this. One way or another, we finish this. The officers stood and saluted. Then they left to prepare their ships and their people for the final battle. The galaxy was watching. Every species, every world, every being who had ever suffered under rule was watching. They had seen humanity rise from the ashes of heirs. They had seen humans free the enslaved and inspire the hopeless. Now they would see if humans could do the impossible one more time. The stage was set. The final battle was coming. And humanity was ready. The planet Prime hung in the darkness like a green jewel. It was beautiful, covered in forests and oceans that sparkled in the light of its twin suns. For 3,000 years, it had been the heart of an empire built on slavery and conquest. Today, that empire would fall. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the Endeavour, watching the enemy fleet arrange itself for battle. 600 warships formed a wall between the Alliance and the planet below. Behind them, orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons. They had gathered everything they had for this final stand. All ships report ready, Commander Taylor announced. Her voice was calm, but Carter could see the tension in her shoulders. They all felt it. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The Alliance fleet numbered 350 ships, humans, and a dozen other species who had joined the cause. They were still outnumbered, but they had something that did not. They had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Carter opened a channel to the entire fleet. This is Admiral Carter. 11 months ago they came to our world. They killed millions of our people. They expected us to kneel. Instead, we stood up. We fought back. We crossed the stars and freed those they had enslaved. Today, we end this war. Today, we show the galaxy that tyranny can be beaten. Today, we fight not just for humanity, but for every species that ever suffered under rule. All ships engage. The two fleets collided like waves crashing against rock. Weapons fire lit up the void. Ships exploded on both sides. They fought with desperate fury, knowing that defeat meant the end of everything they had built. The Alliance fought with the strength of those who had already lost everything and refused to lose any more. Captain Grant led his squadron into the heart of the enemy formation. His fighters danced through a storm of weapons fire, striking at vulnerable points, drawing attention away from the larger ships. 3 of his pilots were killed in the first minute. Grant kept going, his hands steady on the controls, his eyes fixed on the targets ahead. "Stay with me," he ordered his remaining pilots. "We punch through to those defense platforms, take them out, and our ground teams can land." They reached the first platform and opened fire. Grant's disruptors tore through the station's shields, and it erupted in a ball of flame. 2 more platforms followed. Then a cruiser caught Grant's fighter with a glancing blow, sending him spinning toward the planet below. Grant fought to regain control. His engines were damaged, his weapons offline. He was going to crash. But as the ground rushed up to meet him, he managed to aim his crippled ship at a ground battery. The impact destroyed both the battery and his fighter. His last words, transmitted across the fleet channel, were simple: "Worth it." In orbit, the battle raged on. The Endeavour traded blows with the flagship, a massive vessel called the Domination. Both ships were burning, their hulls torn open by repeated hits, but neither would retreat. Dr. Nelson worked frantically in the Endeavour's science bay, analyzing the planetary shields. The shields were the last obstacle. If they could not bring them down, the ground forces could not land, and the war would continue indefinitely. "I need more time," she muttered, her fingers flying across the console. "We do not have more time," replied over the comm. The fleet is taking heavy losses. We need those shields down now. Closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about her team back on Earth, about Turner who had stayed behind to continue the research, about everyone who had worked so hard to get them this far. She could not let them down. Then she saw it, a pattern in the shield harmonics that she had missed before, a gap that opened for just a fraction of a second every few minutes. "I have it," she said, "transmitting the coordinates now. All ships need to concentrate fire on these points at exactly the right moment." Relayed the information to the fleet. Ships that had been fighting independently suddenly moved with perfect coordination. They waited, watching the shields, timing their attacks. The gap opened. 200 ships fired at once. The planetary shields flickered, then collapsed. "Shields are down," announced. "Ground forces, you are clear to land." Captain Shaw's Marines hit the surface minutes later. They landed near the capital city, a sprawling metropolis of towering spires and ancient temples. The streets were filled with enemy soldiers, but also with something else. Civilians who had never seen war, who had never imagined that anyone could threaten their world. Shaw ordered his troops to avoid civilian casualties whenever possible. "We are not them," he reminded them. "We do not kill innocents." The fighting was brutal. House by house, street by street, the Marines pushed toward the central government complex. They lost hundreds of soldiers. They kept going. In orbit, the Endeavour finally destroyed the domination. Admiral Carter watched the enemy flagship break apart, its crew escaping in pods that human ships carefully collected rather than destroyed. "The Supreme Council is requesting communication," reported. Carter straightened his uniform, put them through. The face that appeared on the screen was old, with scales faded to gray and eyes that held the weight of. This was the council leader, the highest authority in the Empire. "Human," the leader said, his voice weary. "You have won. We offer unconditional surrender." Carter was silent for a moment. A year ago, he had watched helplessly as an alien fleet destroyed one of Earth's greatest cities. He had lost friends, colleagues, and nearly lost his own life. Part of him wanted revenge. Part of him wanted them to suffer as humanity had suffered. But that was not why they had fought. That was not what humanity had become. "Your surrender is accepted," Carter said. "The war is over, but the Empire is finished. You will release all slaves immediately. You will disarm your military, and you will answer for the crimes you have committed." The leader bowed his head. "It will be done." 3 months later, Admiral Carter stood before the Galactic Assembly. Representatives from over 100 species filled the Great Hall, beings of every shape and size. Many of them had been slaves just a year ago. Now they were free citizens of a new galactic order. Carter looked out at the assembly and thought about how far they had come. He thought about heirs, about the friends he had lost, about the impossible odds they had overcome. He thought about Nelson and her team, about Captain Grant's sacrifice, about Captain Shaw and his Marines, about every human who had fought and died to reach this moment. "1 year ago," he began, "my species was nearly destroyed. We were attacked by an empire that saw us as nothing more than resources to be harvested. They expected us to surrender. They expected us to break. They were wrong." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We did not fight alone. Every species in this room joined us in our struggle. We freed each other. We lifted each other up. We proved that tyranny, no matter how powerful, cannot stand against those who refuse to accept it." He looked around the assembly, meeting the eyes of beings who had become his allies, his friends. "The Galactic Compact we form today is not an empire. We will not rule through fear or force. We will stand together as equals, protecting each other, helping each other, building a future where no species needs to fear conquest or enslavement." He straightened, his voice growing stronger. The thought they were harvesting a primitive world. Instead, they awakened something the galaxy had never seen. They awakened a species that does not give up, that does not surrender, that fights hardest when everything seems lost. But more than that, they awakened something in all of us. The knowledge that we are stronger together than we ever were apart. The assembly rose in applause. Humans and aliens stood side by side, united by shared sacrifice and hard-won victory. In the crowd, Commander Taylor watched her admiral with pride. She thought about her sister and nephews, gone forever in the attack on Ayers. She hoped they would be proud of what humanity had become. The galaxy had changed. The Empire was gone, replaced by a compact of free worlds working together for mutual benefit. Humanity stood at the heart of it, not as conquerors but as guardians. And every species in the galaxy remembered the lesson they had learned. Never mistake human kindness for weakness, because when humanity is pushed, they do not break. They push back harder. The stars that had once seemed so cold and distant now felt like home. Humanity had found its place among them. And the galaxy would never be the same.